So we're just in time for session 3, and we've got Emile Raubenheimer, who's the CEO of Pop-Up, which stands for People Upliftment Program. Pop-Up has a holistic approach to the upliftment of underprivileged communities in South Africa. Emile further helps companies and individuals to identify their potential. He has Emile. He has a passion for social impact through catalytic interventions to create sustainable change. And Emile is here to speak to us about the nature of money. Let's put our hands together.
I am on? Oh, am I on? There we go. There we go. Wonderful. It's a privilege to be with you this morning. It's been such a blessing to listen to Patrick and Boshoff, and I think they've just given us such a lot of revelation to go process through. I hope that you will engage me in this session. I'd like to share with you some of the things that I've discovered in my own journey with money over the last couple of years, and maybe just some context, because I realize this topic, the nature of money, is a really, there's a dichotomy in that almost doesn't work, but I want to introduce it with some of my story as context. One of the things that I've really been journeying with God about over the last 17 odd years is, what is God's model for business? Because we believe that God created business, right? And so if God created business, why did God create business? Similar to Patrick's question around what does God's economy look like, I had this question around business. And if we understand God's opinion and design for business, would it look like the way that we're currently doing it, or would it look different? And so my journey started in financial services, and I was in that industry for 10 years, and I really learned how Babylon works, right? We've got a Babylonian financial system to a large extent, and a lot of the context within which finances function and within which businesses function is Babylonian by design. I'll give you an example. When you go to business school, you get taught that we're all competing for limited resources. Anybody hear that? In God's economy, is there abundance or lack? Do you see the problem? And so we have this dualism in the way that we approach our Christianity, because what we learn in our relationship with God is that He is this God of abundance, and then we go to business and we say we must all compete for limited resources. And we struggle to reconcile who we are at work with who we are as people in our journey with God, because we're forced to function on two different ways to interpret the world. And I said, God, this doesn't work. What is it about your design for business that we need to discover so that we can figure this thing out? And so this 10 years in Babylon really helped me to understand how the world works. And then God said, Emile, I want you to leave. I want you to start your own business. This was in 2017, and I started a strategy consulting firm where God inspired us to say, how do we bring kingdom to earth in the way that we think about business, in the way that we think about strategy? That was an incredible season in my life. And one of the things that God challenged me on is to say, Emile, why would I start a business? If we think about kingdom as a holdings company, bear with me for a second, and God is the CEO of Kingdom Incorporated. When He speaks a word, that word does not return empty. So when the CEO says, I want to create a subsidiary under Holdco, his word creates that subsidiary, and that word does not return empty. It's not the entrepreneur that builds the business. If this is a kingdom business, it is built by God's mandate, not by the entrepreneur's ego. Do you see the difference? If I am not stewarding God's mandate over the business, but I am stewarding my own ego and my own intentions, then it will be by the sweat of my own brow. I am not functioning under Kingdom Incorporated, and therefore I cannot expect Holdco to bail me out when this thing goes south, because it's not functioning as a Holdco business. Are you with me? Is it conceivable that when God builds a business, He is okay for some of those businesses not to make money? Of course it is. Think about that for a second. If you have a Holdco and you have particular businesses in a value chain that all serve a particular purpose, some of those can be profit centers and some of those can be cost centers. Are you with me? Because in the context of the whole chain, the whole system is more profitable because a particular system is not profit-making. all of a sudden we have to challenge our fundamental understanding of how we think about business in kingdom. Let me ask you this question. What is God's primary objective? Because we've been taught that a business's job is to make money. Am I right? Yes. Let me challenge that for a second. Because we are seeking truth. We want to build our lives on the rock. Truth is not a set of ideas or a set of principles. Truth is a person. Are you with me? I am the way, the truth, and the life. And the truth will set us free. Discerning accurately who Jesus is and what his design is the thing that sets us free. Okay, so we have to interrogate truth. Now, God says that I own all the silver and gold. So is God after our money? Does God need us to make profit because kingdom is going to get bankrupted? No, it's a ludicrous idea, right? What is the one thing that kingdom desperately wants that it does not have? The hearts of every single person. You with me? So what is the job of a kingdom business? It is to redeem the hearts of people. All of a sudden, the objective becomes utterly different to the way that we have been programmed to run the model. And the challenge with this issue is that we have allowed ourselves to make profit at the expense of the dignity of people. How do you think God feels about that? Oh, well done, good and faithful servant. You've abused people that I value more highly than my son so that you can make more money. Do you see the deception in this? It is incredibly difficult to justify. So I'm sorry I'm putting a massive dampener on the mood now, but it is important for us to interrogate the truth. Because let me tell you this, the truth is good, right? Good news is only good news if it's good news. This is good news, so bear with me and I will show you how incredibly good this news is. After the season, where I really discovered how God thinks about the generating of money, because can I just say this, healthy businesses will make money, but as a consequence, not as an objective, okay? So let's just put that out there. I'm not saying businesses shouldn't make money, they should, but in an appropriate sequence. God has moved me into the nonprofit space now, where I'm really confronted not with how we earn money or how we invest money like my previous seasons, but rather how we give money. Because I'm in the social context now. I'm helping people who have no jobs to get education so that they can get jobs. We're in the social quagmire of all the pain that our society is confronted with. And the question is, if God's heart is every single one of those people, then what does the model look like for us to get this right? And so what I want to discuss today is this idea of the nature of money, which, like I said, is a juxtaposition, is a skynbare teenstrydigheid, right? Because money has no nature. We sometimes ascribe nature to money. And I think it's an incredibly dangerous thing. Because money is a mechanism and a tool, and I will explain some more of my views on that. But what I want to ask you for a second is, if you had to think about your life, where do you have the biggest risk in your life's journey? Where are the biggest moments of risk in your life's journey? I would like to call these inflection points. So if you think about your life as this, and the red dots are potential end positions for your life, and all the blue dots are inflection points. What are those inflection points? They are decisions. Are you with me? Because when you make a decision, you alter the trajectory of your life. If you're not making decisions, then the status quo is maintained. That makes sense, right? As soon as you make a decision, you're changing direction. The question is, what informs the decision? Now, we're all very comfortable with this verse that says, you can't serve both God and mammon. Okay, so if the biggest risk factor, if the area where the trajectory of your life has the largest consequence of being deflected in a way, which is your decision, if that is not driven by God but by money, can you honestly tell me that you are not serving mammon? Because the largest trajectory, the largest consequence, the largest implications of the way you live your life is not defined by God, but it is defined by financial consequences. Are you with me? And so it's really easy because we've heard these verses a million times and we're like, yes, but don't serve mammon, which means you go to church and you know. The question is, who do you listen to when you make decisions? So let me give you an example. And Boshoff actually raised this. When your kid goes to study, how many of you make them study something that they can earn the most money on? We literally choose careers based on money. And then we say, no, but we do serve God. I'm saying, well, guys, I think maybe it's time that we ask ourselves some serious questions. Because we allow money to define purpose in our lives. But if God created me with intent and purpose, wove me together in my mother's womb with a particular capacity and a particular trajectory in mind, should I not ask the Creator what His opinion is? And so the question that raised with me is to say, well, if that is not the defining criteria when I make decisions, why am I using something else? I would suggest to you that it comes back to this idea. What do you think about when you think about abundance? Because we know Jesus gives us this mission statement, right? He says, I have come that you may have and life in abundance. So we're saying, well, I'm kind of entitled to a life of abundance. Is it not so? And then I look around me and I say, well, I don't see abundance, so clearly something is wrong. So because I am entitled to this, then I'm going to allow that to define my decisions. And so I make my decisions based on what I think is going to unlock abundance in my life. Jesus gives us a good example. He says, the man who tries to keep his life will lose it. But the man who surrenders his life will gain it. We're back to this idea of surrender. It's really difficult to surrender something to someone you don't know and are not sure you can trust with your life. And so what I want to suggest to you is the way that we think about abundance, and therefore by implication money, is often defined by our fear and our anxiety. But God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of love and of power and of a sound mind. So if my decisions, the most important inflection points that affect the very life that I live, is defined by a fear of not having enough, a fear of not sufficient provision, then who is in control of my life? Because I am defining my entire existence by fear, which is deception. Jesus says, I am life, I am not fear. And the challenge that we have, in my view, is that we have to appreciate the frameworks from which we interpret reality. The book of Ephesians, Paul writes to us, and the book of Ephesians, just for some context, is about sitting in the presence of God, discovering that we are righteous. We are in right standing with God, and then walking that out, our process of sanctification, to be more and more surrendered to His will and purpose over time, so that we can ultimately stand. And then we get into this beautiful discussion about the armor of God, right? To what purpose? He says our battle is not against flesh and blood. Okay, so competition makes no sense. Competition happens when we compare. Are you with me? Why do we compare? To ascertain value. If I do not know the value of something, I'm going to have to get a proxy to determine its value. So I have to ask myself, against a known quantity, how valuable this phone is, how comparatively valuable is this thing? So we use comparison in the absence of understanding value, correct? Okay. Why do we not know the value of something? Because we do not know its purpose. If I understand the purpose of a thing, then I'm able to understand its value, correct? Who defines my purpose? And if I have to resort to comparison, it means that I do not understand God's opinion over my life. So let's get back to this. Our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers and the principalities and the dark forces. Now, this word principalities is interesting because principalities in this context actually refers to mental strongholds, frameworks of thinking, the truth with which the lens through which we view the world. Does that make sense? Our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers and the principalities. Our battle, first and foremost, is with the frameworks in our mind. About our value, about our worth, about our purpose, about our work, about our dignity. And so we use proxies for all of these things, and they begin to define our existence. Now, in the discussions today, I think we've unpacked an incredible amount of valuable stuff. But I do want to challenge you with one thing, and that is we are very quick to jump to conclusions that position us to abscond responsibility, right? We want to blame the system. We want to blame the context. We want to blame the society. We want to blame the culture. We want to blame the economy. Jesus gives us a different perspective. He says, take out the beam of your own eye first. I am now in the realm of broken systems. That's what I do every day. I work with broken systems and the consequences of those systems on our society, particularly on the worth and dignity of individuals. And we can say a lot about systems, but let me tell you this. Who creates and perpetuates a broken system? An individual. Correct? A system isn't just up in the sky somewhere. Somebody is maintaining that system. We can never expect people with warped perspectives of reality to create wholesome systems. So we are going to fail gloriously, all of us, if we try to fix broken systems in our society before we have taken out the beams in our own eye. And let me challenge you with this to say we need to be willing to take personal responsibility in our lives to say, God, what is it that I believe so strongly that is allowing me to warp my view of your perspective of reality that I am part of the problem? Because until I can be someone who brings redemption, who brings life, who brings flourishing to every context in which we engage, I need to stop worrying about other people and say, God, sanctify me first. Change the way I think about these things. I can frame that in a different context, perhaps. There's this idea in science, the philosophy of science. So how we think about science, right? If you think about Galileo Galilei, they had this view that everything revolved around the world at the time. So how science works is you've got a bunch of tests that you run and you get data back, and those tests affirm a premise, an assumption that you've made. And Galileo goes through this process and he starts looking at the stars and they move in really funny ways, and he says, guys, some of these conclusions that I'm coming to, some of the results don't fit the existing model. And when those results, when those anomalies, because initially you just call them anomalies, you're like, no, there was something wrong with the test, because now you must repeat the failure so that you can be sure it's not a flawed test, right? When the anomalies become enough, you have to say we need to change the model. You with me? Okay. So the question that I have for you in your personal life is, if Jesus wants you to live a life of abundance, and we can talk about what that means, and you're not seeing that abundance, you have anomalies in your worldview. Am I right? How many of you have done the work to say, if the worldview does not compute, i.e. the results are different from the expected outcome, that means either the test is flawed or the underlying worldview is broken. Fixing worldview is an uncomfortable process, but the truth will set you free. Do not be kept in bondage by lies or history or the way that you were trained up or your experiences or your trauma, in fact, that keeps you captive in a particular view of reality. Jesus has a different perspective. So, abundance. If everything that God creates. You know, the fascinating thing, if you want to know something about an artist, you look at his art, right? If you don't know the guy, you can see something about how he views reality from his art. Agreed? Okay, so is God a creator? Yes. So can we learn similar things about the character of God by looking at his creation? Praise God. We can do that, right? So if we look at what God breathes, the first thing that God does, John tells us this, he speaks into the darkness and he creates the light. And that light was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Who is the Word? It's Jesus. So the first thing God creates, when he speaks his intent, because intent is in his head, when he makes that intent known to the world, i.e. he sends out a word that is constantly creating, the first thing he creates is his Son. That is our blueprint. And the first thing that he introduces into the world is not activity, it's relationship. Think about that. The fundamental driver of God's creation is relationship, not activity. Think on these things. How many of us, in everything that we do, work, labor, execute? You know the story of Mary and Martha, right? Martha is the older sister, and Jesus is coming to visit. He's kind of a big deal. So it's like a very famous teacher coming to visit your house. So the older sister is up in arms because the house must be neat and tidy. And Mary, we know, sitting at the feet of Jesus. And Martha's getting irritated. So if you were like my mother, you would start like packing the dishwasher really loudly. Right? This is what's happening. So she's frustrated, but the interesting thing is she's not frustrated with Mary. She's thinking to herself, how is it that a teacher of such high acclaim doesn't see the issue and does not address it? She's mad at Jesus. This is fascinating, right? And eventually she doesn't have any dishes to pack anymore, so she says, okay, well, now I can't get more loud and obnoxious. I have to now walk into the situation. And she does that, and she confronts Jesus. She says, Jesus, why do you not tell this woman to come help me? It's fair, right? We understand that. Jesus' response is really fascinating. He says, Martha, Martha, you are troubled by many things, activity, but only one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion. Now, let this not be lost on you. There is a reason why this is an older sister and a younger sister. Because the older sister represents the law, the activity, the earning of redemption, the earning of right standing with God. Because I must work, I must keep the commandments, I must do the things. And Jesus says, I'm introducing a new framework for you, and that framework is relational. Because first and foremost, the thing that is of the most value is quality relationships. Because if people are the point of the kingdom, does it not make sense that relationship is the highest expression of that kingdom? Now, if that is true, how do we define abundance? Is it not in the quality of the relationships in our lives? And that is true whether you are rich or you are poor. And this is why Paul can say, I have been rich and I have been poor, but I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. Because money is never the issue and has never been the issue. Now, I know we're talking about money, so I apologize, but, don't be mad at me, it's Jesus. So, argue with Jesus, I might be interpreting it wrong, and if you have a different view, that's also fine. So what is money then? If money is not the point, my view is that money is a map. And it is a map that represents value. Think about this. Why do we have money? We only have money because we want to facilitate trade, right? You had goats and he had cheese and she wanted goats and she wanted cheese. Now they have to trade. Eventually that becomes ludicrous and ridiculous. Because moving all those products is really complicated and matching them up, because what if she doesn't want goats, she wants eggs? That person wants eggs but doesn't want goats or cheese. What do you do? Right? So money was just there to say, can we get a standard unit of measure that can facilitate trade? So what is it a representative of? It is a representative of underlying value. Are you with me? It is a map. Now, do you guys see this map? Do you know what this map represents? The world. Is it an accurate map? No. Do you guys know that there are no accurate maps? Because the map is not the territory. Right? It is an expression. It is a way to represent territory. But when we try to represent 3 dimensions in 2 dimensions, we always have to make compromises. Does that make sense? Okay. Is money also 2-dimensional? Pretty much. Does it represent 3-dimensional value? Yes. So are there anomalies? Is it conceivable that sometimes the accuracy with which money represents value is not very high? Therefore, is it possible to have value that is not yet represented in money? Of course it is. Is it possible to have money that does not represent value? Yes. 2008 market crash come to mind. It is possible for the economy to create fake value. This happens, right? What we need to appreciate is that if it is a map, it is just a map. Why are we spending so much time and effort and energy in our lives to try to get more of this map? Do you not have the Spirit of God in you? Are we not created in His image and likeness? Okay. So if we are, and God inherently, most core to His being, well, He's love, yes, but He is also a creator. Do we have the capacity to create? What can we create? Value. If you create value, is it conceivable that over time that value will translate into wealth? Yes, but wealth is not the point. Value must become the point of our lives. Because that is to express the God colors that we inherently have, that we can showcase to the world. And if we do that, it will translate. But what we've started to do is we've started to measure the tail and lost sight of the dog. And so the tail is wagging the system. And then we're surprised that the results are anomalous with our expectation. And I want to challenge you today, guys, to say, are we willing to dig into our worldviews, our dearly held beliefs, so that we can comfortably negotiate reality and be comfortable to say, I am going to let some of this junk go because it is not serving me and it is not true. What is the first thing that the enemy does in our lives? He has no authority over and above what I give him, correct? How does he get me to relinquish authority? By deception. How does he steal abundance from us? By deception. Let us take out the beams in our own eyes. Let us discover the truth of God's opinion so that we can be set free. There's a fantastic, I'm going to get into the practical stuff for a second. There's a fantastic model, I think, that David gives us in Psalm 1. You guys know Psalm 1? It's interesting to me because he starts off in the negative, which I feel is quite weird. But I believe it's because he wants to draw attention to this. He says, blessed is the man who does not. Okay. So he's like, blessed are you if you don't. Right? That's really interesting, which shifts the focus from activity into being, which also is quite interesting. What does he say? Who does not? Who does not stand? Who does not walk? Who does not sit? There's a negative spiral in this that I want you to notice. Because it goes from standing, which means I'm just kind of having a conversation, to walking, which means I am partnering with you, to sitting, which means I now associate. I now find identity collectively with you. And all of those degrees get progressively worse. Where does it start? who stands in the counsel of the ungodly. Let me ask you this. How many of you have financial advisors that understand God's opinion over money? Because then I need to ask you this. If they do not understand the purpose of God with money, can they give you godly counsel? They can give you really smart and intelligent counsel, but there will not be wisdom in it. And the first warning David gives is he says, do not stand in the counsel of the ungodly, because if you open that door, you've activated a negative spiral. And what it will cause is that you will now walk in the presence of sinners. Sinners being not activity, but being out of alignment with God's opinion over my life. My energy, my creativity, my gifts and talents are being used for things that are not in line with God's purposes. It is wasted. It is inefficient. It does not create. And if I do that long enough, I'm going to get so despondent. I'm going to get so demotivated that I'm going to sit in the seat of the scornful, to Boshoff's point, because now I criticize. I say, well, I can't get this right, and you losers aren't doing any better. So now I no longer contribute, I just criticize. Yes? But the righteous man, i.e. in right standing with God, he is not so. He meditates. What does meditate mean? Spend time to let it wash over your thinking so that you can be renewed, so that the way with which you interpret reality changes in accordance with that on which you meditate. Correct? What does he meditate on? The precepts and the principles of God. And what shall he be? He shall be like a tree. Wonderful. He will bear fruit in his season. His leaf will not wither. And whatever he does will prosper. The tree is planted where? By the river. Let me ask you this. The capacity of the tree to bear fruit is determined by what? Where it is planted. We spend so much time saying, I am an apple tree. Ugh! Push out apples. Ugh! Create apples. Have you ever seen a tree that do that? No, it just happens. Because of what? Because of its positioning. Right? The profit is the fruit of a healthy business. If that business is planted in the purposes of God and the mandate of God, will that business bear fruit? Yes. If it is not bearing fruit, are we probably missing something? Most likely. Don't blame the business. Blame not understanding God's opinion. Because his word will not return empty. So either God is a liar or I'm missing something. God is not a liar. Yes? This does introduce a couple of things. I think I've made that clear. Money cannot be the objective because God doesn't need money. He doesn't mandate the creating of businesses for money. He created for something else. He wants to restore his design for society. And it's really interesting. In Isaiah 61, we see exactly what that means. Jesus refers us back to this verse, which is why I think it's so important, because we have to separate the two testaments and we have to understand which ones are meant for a nation state and which ones are meant for us after the cross. The fact that Jesus, when he reads in the synagogue, refers back to Isaiah 61 is Jesus' way of pulling that verse into the current context. It has an eschatological implication, i.e. the way we interpret Revelations, which is really important. Because if we're all just sitting here waiting for God to come back, then we become passive and we become useless, and God has not mandated us to do that. So the question is, and I realize I'm ruffling feathers now, the truth will set you free. Be careful what you believe. Jesus' disciples ask him, Jesus, how will we know if the end times are upon us? His response is fascinating. He says, his first response to that is, be careful lest you be deceived. That is his response. Ooh, we want to spend so much time. Just don't be deceived, right? Okay, so if we understand this framework, it introduces something really interesting. Because trees have seasons. And what will happen, we've recently been through winter, right? What will happen when you measure the success of your winter by the fruits of a spring? Will you constantly be disappointed? The gift of the sons of Issachar, the ability to distinguish the seasons and the times. Because once again, who created the seasons? God did. And yet we want perpetual summer. Woo, just grow. Now we must 10x every 3 years. Just, Jesus, just give us blessing. No, it's ridiculous. That's not how He created the world to work. Expecting that means that we're batting off the wrong wicket. It's not because God is not providing. Let me ask you this. Because winter seasons get a lot of bad rap, right? What does a tree do in winter? He pushes his roots deeper. Think about this for a second. In winter, the tree grows beneath the surface. We all think it's resting. It's not resting. It's working freaking hard. Because the growth in winter is in occupied space. In summer, it's growing into the air. There's no resistance there. There's a little bit of gravity, but it's not that much. Beneath the surface, it's occupied by rocks and gravel. And so it's pushing. Why? Why does it do that? So that it can access nutrients that were previously beyond its reach. You with me? And by doing that, it increases the foundation so that the tree can bear more weight. And if it did not do that, there would be no growth in summer. Because it reaches its capacity. You know, the tree at the bottom is the same as the size of the tree at the top. If the tree at the bottom doesn't grow, the tree at the top doesn't grow. So if you take one season out of God's design, you stagnate. And we are of the view, you know, some of our seasons we murmur through. We're like, oh, God, this sucks. I hate autumn. My wife is like that. She loves 3 seasons of the year, but winter she hates. If we do not appreciate a season, we do not appreciate it because we do not understand its purpose. Don't blame God because your season sucks. Blame yourself because you haven't sat at His feet to discover the purpose, because every season is beautiful and every season is valuable, but we have to learn to respond to that in the appropriate way. Cultivate a life of gratitude. Are you with me? Okay, so understanding our season becomes so critical in our finances, because if we're expecting summer but Jesus is taking us through winter, we're constantly going to feel like we're failing. We're constantly going to feel, and the enemy just uses that to attack our worth and dignity, to say, you're worthless, you're never going to get this right. He speaks into identity. That has nothing to do with it. It's a season. And Jesus is in the season, and He will make it work together for our good, because that's what He promises. So either He's a liar or it's just not true. The second thing that we need to appreciate is that when we take a relational view of money, which I'm positioning to you today is the only way to do it. It's not an activity thing. It's a relationship thing. It moves us out of stewardship. Because in stewardship, we are complying. We're saying, I need to give this much, I need to spend this much, I need to invest this much, and tick, done. No discussion necessary. It's the same in every single season, because once you know how to steward, you know how to steward, and you just steward. But Paul introduces something interesting in 1 Corinthians 13, which is about love, right? Relationship. And he says, when I was a child, when? Not if, when. When I was a child, I thought like a child, I spoke like a child, and I reasoned like a child. But now that I have become a man, I have put away childish things. You see, the implication is when we move in our financial understanding from stewardship, i.e. a list of compliance, and once I figured it out, to sonship, I introduce a concept of maturity. Because sonship is a progressive revelation, which means that every season I am growing, I am learning, I am discovering, I am increasing capacity. And it comes with 3 questions. It says you need to mature in the way that you think about your earning. You need to mature in the way you think about your spending, and you need to mature in the way that you think about your giving. It's not just a cheat sheet that says do this, do this, do this. No, Jesus brings it into relationship. He gives us this beautiful example of the rich young man. You know the rich young man, right? And the rich young man comes to Jesus, And he says, what must I do to enter the kingdom of God? You guys know the story, right? And Jesus answers him and he quotes the last 4 commandments, 6, 7, 8, 9. He leaves out 10 and then he jumps to 5. Honor your father and your mother. And the rich young man says, yes, but I've kept all of these things. And Jesus actually challenges him with commandment number 10. And there's an interesting thing that's happening here. He says, now give away all your money and come follow me. And the rich man walks away despondent because he has much. What is Jesus doing? He's saying, move away from the coveting. Move away from the comfort. Move away from what you want. He's calling him into an epic adventure. And he's saying, come follow me, as in come into relationship. Leave the stuff, leave the activity, leave the metrics. Come into relationship. He says the price is too high. Jesus calls every single one of us into a relationship. Because in relationship, abundance will find expression. Let me ask you this. If God is your creator, and he knit you together with intent, because he has a plan for your life, he weaves into you the perfect gifting that you need to represent all the God colors that you have, is it conceivable that the most abundant life you can live is to give expression to everything that God has given you? Why do you have to wait for money to do that? I'll close with this. Trust is the soil in which faith is cultivated. It is incredibly difficult to say, God, I'm going to engage this epic adventure. I'm going to engage a life of faith. Not because I've got a slush fund, but because I know who you are. And I will walk worthy of the calling for which I have been called, and I will trust that you will provide in due course. And that is incredibly difficult to do if I do not trust God. And how do we learn to trust God? I think it's incredibly difficult to trust someone that you don't know. But God has done so much to show us that he is trustworthy, that he is consistent, that he is true, that he has the best plans in mind for us. And there is no plan or idea or way of living that I can conceive that can outsmart what God has in store for me. And if I am stuck in that place where I say, God, I'm not sure whether your plan is really better because fear is keeping me captive, then I want to encourage you to say, interrogate the worldview that you currently hold about the character of God. Because when you discover his truth about his character, trust is easy. Thank you so much for your time.